maybe I start my with a question to Philippa, who hasn't sort of presented, so that we have a little bit of a balance in terms of work. I know how keen you are, Philippa, on regenerative thinking, regenerative worldview, regenerative design, and the experience that we had a couple of months ago in London. We spent about 1.5 hours on the topic with about 10 other colleagues, and how we went away a little bit confused, a little bit thinking about the topic, etc. And I also know that you're one of the proponents of our Design Excellence Initiative, which is meant to be bringing some element of uniformity in the work that we produce across, the 5,000 people in the buildings of Ramboll, and eventually in the 17,000 people that we are. I just wondered whether you can share with us a little bit about how do we embed our ethos into our business and our everyday work in your experience. How have we done it?
It's a great pleasure and a privilege to join all of you, and thank you. I thought this is a great question and a great topic on ethos. So it's interesting because ethos is the thing that actually it really drives the decisions that we make and what we prioritize as a business. And so our mission is to create sustainable societies where people and nature flourish, and with that comes a very clear focus on regenerative design, focusing on the 1.5 degree ambition, circularity, and so on. The how is very, very interesting. And we'll start with one of the key pieces, which is actually storytelling. And that is telling the story of our founders, so Hanneman and Ramboll, and the ethic that they started with, which was this real desire to make a difference post-World War II, to being able to actually design to reconstruct Europe, and the passion with which they delivered that, the desire to give back to society. Now that's a story we tell everybody who joins the business, and they know that they're receiving the baton to continue that work. The second piece in the how is actually about being a learning organization. A learning organization is hard to achieve, but when we're at our best, it's about passing good practice and learning on swiftly and efficiently. And a learning organization is one that can create knowledge, that can acquire knowledge, and importantly, can transfer knowledge at scale. And that is something in Ramboll we're very good at, but we work hard to be able to do it. And that means that the ethos, plus the practicality of actually transferring all that information, that knowledge, and that passion, means that we can actually achieve regenerative design and the thinking that goes behind that right across the piece. And just to finish on that, for me, it's about the head, the heart, and the hands. The head, the logic, why as Ramboll we focus so much on sustainability. The heart, which is about hiring people who share that passion, and the hands, which is about arming people with tools and the methods and the ability to then be able to take that into their work.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for that beautiful representation of what we are about within Ramboll, and what our ethos and what our ambitions are. Michaela, you were the last to present, so maybe I post one question to you. I love the sense of optimism and the possibilism that existed, that came through your presentation, and I don't mean it in a flippant way, but I want to ask you one question, which I'm sure you've been asked many times. So that's an easy one. You've had an answer, and that is like, what do you guys dislike about the right angle? What's wrong with 90 degrees that you guys so masterfully avoid every time you have the opportunity to do that? But while you're thinking about that profound question I put to you, maybe sort of as a follow-on question, a little bit more serious, what makes you guys so consistent in your work? That not only now people within the industry, design community or built environment industry, but also public at large, sort of think that they can recognize a Zaha Hadid project How do you guys do it?
Thank you for your question, and thank you, Filippa, for your inspiring words. Hussein, I think it's a little bit of a myth, obviously. And, you know, Zaha famously said there is 360 degrees in the world, why stick only to one? So it has become a little bit of a you know, recurring question. But, you know, since you asked it, I think that there's a good point about it, which is when you look at solutions from kind of first principle point of view, you actually have to take into account all possibilities. And I think, you know, the industry, and if you remember the beginning of my presentation, we had this, you know, I had this slide of the Forbidden City, and then this slide of the Le Corbusier with Radius, and, you know, saying, you know, everything was established on a 90 degrees angle. And actually, it was possibly too rigid to answer so many complexities, so many issues of society, and hence it failed. And hence architecture has moved on. I think we all, you know, all our colleagues in the room today have a knowledge that we need to move on to respond to different challenges. Because, I mean, for us, one of the key inspiration was obviously nature. And we looked at, you know, how does nature respond to basic questions of, you know, building up a tree or putting rocks, assembling rocks together. So issues of statics and issue of stability are answered by nature, and they're not answered by 90 degrees. There are in some specific cases in which you can find very sharp angles, but most of the times nature would go for the kind of the least resistant path. And that's something we both worked on together on projects when we looked at, you know, how does construction actually respond to performance, and not only to what the industry wants us to do, because it's easier to construct. And ultimately, you know, you can think of the performance of the building from multiple points of view. It's not only statics, it's sheltering, it's shading. There is many opportunities where you can see that different shapes and different forms actually allow us to get a better reply. And there are cases where, you know, if you have to do a bedroom, you need to fit a bed. You want to have a 90 degrees wall because you want to have a very efficient space to in a small compact room to fit some standard size furniture. But most of the times you can actually, once you get to a certain scale, you'll actually find advantages in moving away from that 90 degrees angle. And, you know, sometimes it's not the building that is easiest to build, is the one that performs at the best level. And I think that is very important for us architects to state, is that, you know, that there is that pain during the design and the construction process, but then ultimately, you know, as Luis said, we're building the backdrop for our society. So you want to really create the optimal space for people to facilitate their daily life. And you know, if you walk in a park, you never walk in 90 degrees angle. Why would you have to do that in a building? So our inspiration comes from nature, and that's really not in terms of biomimicking or kind of trying to reproduce nature, but really trying to find, even if you want simple solutions to complex problems. And sometimes, you know, the only reason why you can attack some of our projects is because we don't have 90 degrees angle, and that's pretty much it. So I think it's a very good starting point for us. It's a very good question. And the issue of consistency, I think it's more about the method. It's more about the way you work and the way the team actually answers questions. And rather than having a specific kind of formal agenda, I think all the panelists today, everyone has huge array of projects, a lot of different designs, materials, and different approaches, but each of us is fairly recognizable in what we do, because there is a certain way of working, certain way of establishing design stages, creating, let's say, almost the design concept as a contract between the client, the architect, and the consultants team, and the engineers, and eventually the contractor, where the drawing becomes the legal document. And how you evolve that drawing is it's obviously how you actually then develop a building, and that is part of our individual method. So that's what I see in the level of consistency. We challenge the concept a lot in this office. We have a lot of alternative options. We compete with each other. Sometimes we have different teams proposing solutions for the same project, and that allows a certain level of tension and consistency within the design we provide. So that's what we try to do, and I think it's important to remember that this level of challenges are ever changing, because you know, the resources are getting scarcer, the economic pressure is higher, clients are more demanding, they have limited budgets, so you have to put all of these things together, and there is kind of a piling up of challenges to the design team on how to respond. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Yeah, thank you, Michele, for that great answer. As you said, you know, maybe not necessarily mimicking nature in the sense of sort of visual mimicry, but something that is very close to the hearts of both Philippa and I know, is that sort of for us trying to get close to the mind of nature, to the systems that exist in nature, so that how we can introduce those into our projects and our design sort of engineering work, etc., through that sort of whole process of regenerative thinking. I appreciate that. Louis, I recall a conversation that you and I had when you were sharing a very personal things with me. I'm sure at that time you didn't know that I would be sharing it with the public at large now, but I'm going to do that if you don't mind. I recall you telling me about one of your experiences with the late Henning Larsen, where you know, you're a young design architect, you're still young, but you know, you were younger then, and you would, you know, he would come and critique your work and not everybody else's work, and to sort of give some ideas and some advice. And then the last thing was that he would sort of, as he was leaving, he would say, okay, now make it better. And he would just walk off. Do you remember that? Like the most uninstructive instruction, just make it better. And he would walk off. Now, what I see is that as uninstructed that may have been, but you know, you guys continue to make your work better. Not only on one project, one stage to on another, but also one project on another. I've seen your latest competition-winning church in Copenhagen. I congratulate you for that. It would be good for you to share with us a little bit about the processes and methodologies that you have in the office. You shared some of it in your presentation, but if you want to, how do you initiate a project? How do you protect the things to make things a little bit better every time?
It's also difficult. Everybody around this table will know that. No, but what happened was that when I started, we were only a small studio of 20-something people, and now we are much bigger. And one thing we discovered through the years was that we had to have a common way of looking at things, which is not a prescriptive design idea, but much more like a process of getting there. And then, of course, let's say the ideas of the world, so to speak, in a way. And what we did was that we had a yeah, I talked about that in the talk, but this terrible thing of losing 12 competitions in a row is really heartbreaking as an architect. Everybody knows that. But this idea that there's a certain language you establish that you can share. And it means that it's not like you're talking to somebody speaking Japanese and Danish and trying to communicate. You're trying to establish something where it's the same kind of platform you're on, and there's an understanding of where you are in the process. And that have helped tremendously with the projects, both in quality, but also the winning ratio of competitions have gone up by doing that. And I think it's so fundamental that we as architects, we have in the very beginning, as soon as we see a place, we kind of make up an idea even before we even know the brief. It's like we just see the place, look at the opportunities and potentials, and somehow that becomes the reality. And in a lot of projects, there's a much more complex kind of expectation in it. And what we learned is that if we spend the time of really in depth chasing these let's say the info, but also the aspirations and ambitions, there is a chance to design on a basis that's different. And it's, so this part had nothing to do how projects look like. But of course, when you come to the design process, it's very difficult not to design something that is in the family, so to speak, or like in something we discuss. It's part of a bigger discussion. Each project is just let's say one position in a bigger discussion. It's not like it's totally standalone, even though we always say to each other that this project is totally unique. If you look at it, let's say 2 years later, you can find elements that came from something else. And I think that's totally fair. In any artistic production, you always have this thing that's something inspiring you. But to be able to really dig into what it's all about and hone in on that with your design skills, that's been a big thing. And I think what you said, Michelle, was very inspiring, talking about nature and this about a park. You wouldn't walk a straight line. And I think that is so fundamental for our thinking that we somehow had to question things. At the moment, and I'm not saying anything about Germany, but any German master plan, that's a set of square boxes on a field, and then when you do the building, it's also square, and the facades are also square. The whole thing is kind of pretty square, and you wonder what's that must be a discussion that can't be something that have just happened with all architects in Germany. It comes out of something that is a bigger discourse that's been discussed among a lot of architects and officers, and I think we have it in each of our studios in a mini version, that there's a discourse that you do things with. That's why it is like that. But basically what we're trying to do here is that we are maximizing the freedom in the design work, and so it's the discussion of the design and what it qualifies and what it means and what it does to the place that's important, and trying to shy away from being too prescriptive in the way we look at it in the pinups.
Great, thank you.
It's interesting you mentioned the German competitions. We actually do competition in Germany. No one knows about it because we lose every single one of them. I think we did probably 30 in the past 5 years, and we lost every single, and now we have a name. You know, when we look at new projects, we say this is a German competition. They're going to invite 20 architects. We're not going to win, but we should go because we should try. And you know, surely we're going to lose, and it doesn't matter. We're still going in for it. And it's such a funny thing.
No, but then what's so interesting is that if you talk to the non-architects of the country, they are longing for a more poetic way of doing things and a much more, let's say, organic understanding of the city, of buildings and places. And Germany have a fantastic tradition. If you go into it, we have 4 places in Germany, but we are trying in all our projects to push this hard line of the box thing, and of course you can't push it all the way, but you can push it a little position each right. time, so it's happening. But I know the feeling of losing a lot in Germany. Yeah.
we've all lost a lot in Germany. That's correct, but we've also won a reasonable number. Jonathan, thank you for your patience. You've been sitting there for like 23 minutes, and thank you. I appreciate your patience. One of the things about the work that I first noticed about your work, is like about 20 years ago, literally, was the rigor that went through everything you guys did in your thinking process and things. And what impressed me at that time, I still had this romantic notion of when you become a sort of brand designer, brand architect, you turn up in a room and tell the client, this is what you do. And the guy says, why? He said, because I think so. But you guys produce so much work. Apart from the quality of your work, the quantity of drawings and studies and things that you would do. And one of the things that is sort of stuck in my mind was your relationship with material, craftsmanship that was embedded in your design. You know, you wouldn't design and say, okay, well, it's going to be built by someone later. So you would think about how it's going to be built, and then you would design as if you would get inspired by the way it's built, and then you would design for building, and then you would think about building, and then you would design. And so this sort of symbiotic relationship between these two, as one of them, is that something that you want to talk to us a little bit about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it probably has a number of answers. Without any doubt, Norman's passion, I mean, the very first project that we did, the Reliance Industries, there are lovely one-to-one hand-drawn details of a project which in the mid-late 60s was pretty uncommon for an architect to be doing. That was probably imagined to be what the contractors did. So there was a huge personal interest from his part. And I think what's also interesting is that in the very early days of the office, when it was just a handful of people, it was an integrated office. There was an engineer within a team of architects. And that passion for our architecture to be something which is, from the beginning, is integrated with the other prime disciplines, is an ethos which has stayed with us. And similar to Lewis, we're now an office way bigger than we were 50, 60 years ago, obviously. But that passion for an integrated way of designing is absolutely at the core of the business. I think also the way in which we have what we call a design board. It's a way of ensuring that we have a house level of quality. It's not about house style. It's about ensuring that there's transfer of knowledge. We have incredibly talented young people who are joining us in their 20s, and there are some of us who are approaching their 60s, and we have people who are in their 70s. So we have an immense range of experience. And it's about imparting the knowledge, the transfer, so that the qualities that we had many decades ago are not lost as people ultimately leave the office. So we have a way of sharing knowledge, of reviewing projects, so that over our many international offices, there is a level of consistency. I think the point you were making at the beginning about the involvement to make sure that something which is conceived can be built. We are absolutely passionate about working with industry and pulling in suppliers and contractors as early as possible within a process. To us, that involvement with those people who can ultimately build the product is something which should be embraced as quickly as possible. It always has been, because otherwise the drawings you're producing are perhaps just slightly naive. They need input of experienced suppliers and contractors. And we actually love doing that. The point you made, which is amusing, the idea that you turn up to see your client and say, this is the way it's going to be because. And that's a tricky one, because there's always the question, well, why? Why should it be this way? Which is it's a very simple question, but sometimes it's quite difficult to defend. We always try and have a reason for why we're doing what we're doing, a logical reason. And whether it's to be inspired by a particularly interesting quirk of a client's brief, or perhaps a characteristic of the location. We do very much like to design things that are unique but belong to a place. If we can, along the design journey, if we can have these moments of really solid influence, then it's like a child's comfort blanket. It's something which you can rest back on and say, we did it because of this, and together we decided that this was the best way to do it. And picking up the point that Michele made about options, there's never one answer. There's the right answer at the right time for a right set of circumstances. And at any time, if those were to change, then one could question the answer. But obviously, we have to work within time frames, so decisions need to be made, and making a decision and sticking to it is quite a good idea, because we can endlessly re-examine things. Sometimes that luxury of time is not a good thing, and sometimes working under high pressure, short time frames is is actually a good thing because it focuses a team to make a good decision. So I think the craftsmanship it's a real love of working with materials. We've always tried to find new materials for projects. It's a quest which any architect is always looking for. How can we do things differently? Today, obviously, it's a low carbon count sustainable agenda, which is incredibly important, more so than it ever was. I think perhaps those are the sorts of answers. Hopefully that's touched on something to answer your question.
Yeah. Yes, that's great. Yes, you mentioned your review sessions, which I have been exposed to a number of times, and how they are the protectors of consistency, as you were. You share experience. You've got a panel that reviews projects which happen across the board, and you've showed in presentation how your buildings, actually, when you look at the building, they look different, but there is that DNA that runs through Foster's project, and that is sort of comes from the process, the methodology you have. Louis shared the design methodology that they have, and I know that they have a very robust one as well, and so have Michael in the office. Hence, I would have thought that sort of the similarity that I see in your work and in your processes. I'm going to ask you sort of separately, maybe a little bit controversial. If you're not happy to answer, I'm happy to move on. But I'm going to ask Philippa one question that in our case, in the case of Ramboll, and we are a sort of foundation-owned company. How do you think that has helped us differentiate from those which are not, those are sort of industry partners? We used to call them competitors, but in a regenerative thinking, we call them industry partners who are not foundation-owned. How have we been able to protect some of the ambitions that we have because of the foundation ownership arrangement we have?
The foundation structure, which means that most of Ramboll, 97%, is owned by the foundation for the express purpose of sustainability and longevity for our employees. That comes with come back to the topic of the day, the ethos around investing back into our employees, and it's very different. I've worked in many different forms of company. I've worked in PLCs, I've worked in partnerships, and now in a foundation. It feels really different when you're in it, because the ethos that comes with that foundation actually drives and allows people to have the mandate that goes back to the original Ramboll and Hahnemann, the two wonderful, well, one of whom was a humanitarian, the other of whom was an engineer, who had this great vision that then passes through and down the different generations, which I think is absolutely wonderful. Going back to then just a bit on the consistency question, and particularly regenerative design. I mean, these are new areas for us, which means that actually we've got to be very serious about making sure that we have good governance around it. And so we've been very specific about that. We take that topic seriously within Ramboll. We don't use the term regenerative design lightly. We have a set of criteria that we have to pass if we're going to say that something actually is regenerative. And we are very careful to be true to that. And, we've now got a design excellence board that takes its inspiration, if you like, from this very session we're having. And that is one of the ways in which we apply that governance to be able to make sure that we are doing high quality regenerative work. And we mean what we say and what we do.
Thank you. Yeah, that is crucial, especially the governance on the use of these words. As you rightly said, I know that you're one of the proponents of that within Ramboll, to make sure that these terms are not used casually, and that they're not demeaned, devoided of the meanings that they have. We have I think about another sort of 10 minutes. We have a bit more time. I'm going to maybe pose a question to Louis. But if you guys want to sort of jump in and sort of ask questions from each other as well, please do that. But Louis, one quick one before I ask a very personal question from each of you to finish off this panel discussion. One of the things that I see, Louis, in your work, you didn't touch on it in your presentation because of the time that you had. You seem to have your work seems to have a very emotive and intimate connection with light. You talk about the spaces that you create. Yes, it's a background to what happens. It is like for people. You mentioned the sort of being prepared to be surprised by the way spaces are used. These are my words, but you may said something else. But you also have a very strong link with light. Your work. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that? It's a consistent theme that runs through your project.
Yeah.
I have misunderstood your.
No, not at all. No. I there were so many things to say, so I didn't do the full daylight discussion. But daylight is kind of maybe the most, let's say, dominant thing in the legacy of Henning Larsen in person. And I remember when I started here many years ago. The first thing he said was like, you have to understand space is kind of understood as a naked person stands in a room informed by daylight. It was like, okay, very difficult to grasp as a young architect, but I think I got the point at some time that it is about how light is kind of forming spaces, but it's also how it's been perceived and experienced by the people in the spaces. So what we have done many years is that really working with daylight coming in and forming spaces and stuff like that, and the relation of inside and outside. And 12-15 years ago, we started going more scientifically into it with a research team. And today we can qualify and quantify the light first of all, but then qualify the light, what it really means in depth. And we have these 22 researchers sitting here, and a good portion of them works with daylight and artificial lighting. And what we can see is that if we have the right, let's say, proportion of daylight in a space, if it's a learning situation, a school or university, we can see the learning curve is much better with daylight. And one of the things that we found out, and we didn't know before we started this, was that it's not the light per se in its own right. It is the change of the daylight during the day that really makes this big difference. And another thing that we just have finalized is a research program where we looked at the connection between daylight, artificial lighting, and noise in schools and kindergartens. Because I'm sure all of you know this feeling of coming into a kindergarten and you think, how can they survive with this noise level 5 minutes? And what you learn is that there is a really clear connection between how you lit a space, either from the windows and openings to the outside, or with artificial light. And with the artificial light, we saw clearly that if you replaced the traditional 300 lux outlining of the space for cleaning and had focused lights over small tables, kids are lowering their noise level dramatically because they speak to each other and not to the space. And that was a really a thing. So daylight is like, it's in all the projects all the time, and we are testing it now. We're trying to somehow show it. We have a big hospital we've done in Norway, and in that one we're doing a research program right now to understand the recovering time after surgery. If we can somehow prove that there's or show that there's a connection between how exposed the patients are to daylight and the outside and the recovery time after surgery. So it is a big thing here.
True. Thank you.
And I also want to say,
yeah.
just one thing, it's
Sure.
difficult to, one of these things when Jonas is talking about how generations of knowledge, how you kind of transfer that to the next ones, it's one of these that are a little difficult. You somehow have to believe in it. You have to get on board to really work with it. We're trying to do that a lot with the younger architects, especially in the early phases of a project and design phase. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I'm going to pose one question to both Michele and Jonathan, and do please feel free to disagree with me. But what I found was, while the external expression of your work, your projects can be somewhat different, definitely due to the sort of uninitiated, but I find your projects, your work tends to be somewhat driven by environmental responsiveness on every project that you have. Environment is a big thing. You touched upon it in your presentation, and I know that how much you guys care about it. Technology integration, how much you work with technology, and also with the sense of purpose. The purposeful design, which is a big thing for us, for Philippa and I, environment, technology, and purpose. Am I reading it correctly? Of course, then all put together with a sense of rigor and with courage. Is that something that do you want to add to that? Disagree with me? Agree with me?
Is this something you think we have in common, or
yes? Yeah,
is that your point?
I think that join you together, and then while of course there are points of departure where hence your projects sort of these outwardly look different, but there are quite a lot of common ground within you guys.
Well, maybe I think the challenges are there, right? They haven't changed. Society challenges. I mean, if anything, there are more challenges today. And the responsibility of the architects is obviously to respond to those and to help the industry develop. So I think Jonathan touched on it, on the idea of bringing also the builder on board early on and really, helping promote the industry and the business. And I think what unites us in this room today is the will to actually develop architecture as a profession and as a business, because in many ways, I think it's still, we had real pioneers. We all work for practices which had pioneers of kind of contemporary architecture that founded them. And we are now in a phase where we're actually trying to establish architecture as a proper profession. And this means that you have peers that you confront yourself with, you compete with each other, you try to get better solutions and better responses, and you need that. That's why we love London so much. We need that melting pot and that critical mass of great architecture design practices, because we can all compete and we can all look at each other's work. And obviously in the daily, unless we have an occasion like today, normally we just focus on our competitions, our projects, our clients, but we always look at what each other is doing. And I think that is a great way of naturally advancing. So yeah, competition helps.
Thank you. That's
no
great.
doubt.
Yeah, fantastic. Jonathan, same question to you.
I think the other thing I would add, I think you've also got to make sure that, particularly when working with commercial clients, that you're giving them great value for money. If it's residential design, it has to be highly efficient. The net to gross of offices is also something which is something which you have to bear in mind. So yes, all the points you mentioned are absolutely there in all of our work, but there are other things, and I think we're always trying to find something which, if it's residential, let's say, there's got to be some sort of unique selling point. If they're competing in a market, what is it about their building that is better than their competitors? If it's offices, I think these days it's absolutely, how is it the most sustainable? There are a couple of projects that we're talking to people about at the moment where they're saying, well, okay, so GSAS lead numbers, 4s, 5s, 6s, this is interesting, but what about number 7? we need to do more. So I think it's also a responsibility to try and educate in the nicest possible sense and in the least condescending way, to educate your clients, because they look to us to give them something which they had never expected they were going to get. They look to us as professionals to give them something better than they had before. Those challenges are ever present, and I suppose in the world in which we live these days, without any doubt, I guess you would say it's a moral responsibility to do that. So it's we are a service industry, and we need to provide our clients with the best possible service, whatever that may be. And we all three companies here, and yourselves the same, Philippa, we all do that. I think it's excellent that we don't do it in the same way, because life would be terribly boring, and I suppose some of us will be out of a job. So I think the more we continue to do things differently, the better.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. I know I have been a terrible moderator. We've busted our time, but I'm going to ask you one last question, each of you. And if you can please answer with, if you can do with 1 word, that's fine. If 10 words, that's also fine. This is the last session of today, and this whole inaugural event that we've organized. We are obviously hoping to be repeating it next year and the year after, etc. In the way of some inspiration for our future sessions, I know your occupation is architects, designers, thinkers. Ours is engineers, managers, leaders, etc. In Philippa's case, but that's our occupation. What is your major preoccupation? What keeps you awake at night, outside your immediate work? Philippa, sorry to put you on the spot.
It's a great question. I have enormous anxiety about how we are going to respond to the climate emergency, how we are responding. And I mean that really genuinely. The challenge is so immense, and it requires a level of collaboration which we've never achieved or seen before. But I'm also extremely optimistic that there's the will out there to do that.
Fantastic answer. That's great. Yep. Louis?
Well, I agree with Philippa. That is the biggest. But if I'm looking in a more, let's say, closer perspective in architecture, I'm so optimistic about this reconnection to craftsmanship through this whole discussion of sustainability and how technology is in it. It's in my career the first time we are getting closer to what we do and not getting further away as we've been for many years through the digitalization and stuff like that. Now we are honing in. I think it really gives us a chance also to do something about these bigger challenges we are facing. And I agree, the collaboration needs to be much stronger across. Thank you.
Jonathan, what keeps you awake?
I think that thinking about you, obviously. The first 2 points that have been made they are without doubt the most important, because I assume we've all got children, and the world of which we will impart to them is something which we're all responsible for. So completely endorse what's being said. Maybe the other one is to always be able to do something different. It's to do the same thing again, you could possibly do it better. That's interesting. You could craft it more, but I think the interest is always coming up with a different way of doing the same thing, or a different way of doing a different thing, because we are creative people. So innovation is perhaps something which we need to be constantly thinking about.
Thank you. Michela, last word?
Yeah, well, I share all the points, and I have to say, the children and the future generation is a key preoccupation for all of us. But establishing a true circular economy, I think, in the construction industry, it's a great challenge for the future, and I think that's really where we're going and where we're striving to go. And technology will help us in that direction. So I think that to me is, how to crack that imbalance between the construction of the new and the retention of the past, and especially now that Asia has built up so much, they will also have to face that challenge. Land is scarce, and that will be very, very interesting. How do we reuse?
Absolutely. Thank you all. On that note, on creative anxiety, as it were, the message that if you don't have anxiety, you're not creating anything new. I thank you all, Philippa, Louis, Jonathan, Michele, and
thank you,
I
Hussein.
wish you a great week, months, and years ahead, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.